I would ask unanimous consent that Adam Roloff of my staff be allowed on the floor during this period of time.
Without objection.
Madam President, we're all in kind of pins and needles wondering what the President is going to say today in his speech on the budget, George Washington University. I hope he comes with a strong program to get the budget deficit down, because presidential leadership will really help us get the job done. But Congress can do it on its own, but it's going to be a lot easier if we know we're working with the President instead of against the President. And I hope the President's remarks today reflect the fact that elections have consequences, and the consequence of the last election was a very strong message to Washington that we ought to get spending down and government ought to be smaller. And anticipating what he says, I want to make some remarks, and my anticipation is based upon things that have already been said from the White House by staff of the direction the President's speech is taking. If we learned anything during the last 2 years, it's that America can't tax and spend its way back to prosperity. The voters understood that and sent a powerful message to Washington last November. Stop piling debt on the next generation. Stop the overspending that mortgages our children's future and jeopardizes job creation. Now, thanks to the gravitational pull of the Republican majority in the House of Representatives, responding to the results of the last election, the compass is starting to point in the right direction. Despite the 2-against-1 lineup of the debate, meaning the President and the Democratic Senate on one side and the House under the control of the Republican on the other side, that 2-to-1 lineup, we have a continuing resolution of what must be a long-haul committed effort. The continuing resolution that we'll pass this week is just the beginning, because the hard work has only just begun. That's reflected in the leadership demonstrated by the House of Representatives Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan. He did what the President failed to do in his budget proposal: get serious. Now today, I hope we have evidence that the President is getting serious. But up till now, the President ducked, even ignoring his own Deficit Reduction Commission report, fresh off the printer. He hasn't said yes or no whether he supports the recommendations of the Bowles-Simpson Commission. In sharp contrast, House Chairman Ryan stepped up and put ideas on the table for fiscal responsibility. Today, in response to this effort to show the voters that we got it in the last election, that it's time to reduce spending in Washington, the President is giving a speech on reducing the debt. After reluctantly coming to the table for very modest reductions in spending that's going to be in this continuing resolution that we hopefully pass this week, the President has quickly moved past any focus on getting spending under control and seems to be going back to that same old saw that we've got to have tax increases to reduce the deficit. But history proves that tax increases do not bring an additional dollar to the bottom line. Tax increases are a license to spend even more than the $1 that might come in from a tax increase. And we also know that increasing taxes are not going to reduce the deficit. Only growing the economy is going to reduce the deficit. And tax increases can have a detrimental impact on growing the economy because government consumes wealth, it doesn't create wealth. Only workers and investors and people that invent and people that create wealth. Now, there's always been a tug of war in Washington between tax cutters and big spenders. There are those of us who believe taxpayers have a right to keep more of their own money and decide how best to save and spend and invest those dollars. Now, others here in Congress and in Washington believe that Washington knows best and work relentlessly to divert more private resources into the public coffers, recycling even more tax dollars through Washington, especially during an economic downturn that we're in now, and 8.8% unemployment prove it. Doing more of that just doesn't make sense if you want recovery. Consider the work of two U.S. presidents from opposite sides of the political spectrum. Study the history of John Kennedy on one end and Ronald Reagan on the other. They understood that raising taxes bore negative consequences for job creation and economic growth. You may remember that during World War II and afterwards, we had 93% marginal tax rate. Who decreased that? Not some Republican president, but a Democrat president. Reduced it because it was not raising revenue and it was hindering the economy. And you have a situation when corporate and personal income tax rates climbed during the Great Depression. We have proof that unemployment kept climbing as well. In fact, if there's two things you want to remember from Hoover that we should never make mistakes again, he raised taxes tremendously high, and he signed the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill, leading us into the Great Depression. As America struggles today to shake off the biggest economic downturn in decades, we can't afford to repeat the same mistakes. We should learn from history. In an economy where consumer spending accounts for nearly 70% of the nation's gross domestic product, and small businesses account for 70% of the new jobs, it would be foolish to divert even more of America's taxpayer money into the federal treasury. With a smaller tax liability, small business owners can expand their operations, upgrade their equipment, hire more workers in their hometown communities. But tax policies designed to increase revenues for more government spending won't help these hometown business leaders create new jobs that can attract and retain talent and vitality in those smaller towns. What's more, raising federal tax rates would stunt the positive ripple effect that occurs in the local economy and the local tax base when small businesses are able to grow and expand their sales, output, and profits. Raising taxes sets the stage for paralyzing setbacks for small business. So we should not forget that many small business owners are subject to the highest marginal tax rates and federal estate taxes. I've worked for a long time for tax policies that give small business owners the freedom and opportunity to hire, expand, and grow their businesses without having profit-burning taxes and overly burdensome regulations get in their way of getting ahead and living the American dream and creating those jobs. Marginal tax rate increases are especially harmful to small businesses because small businesses are typically organized as flow-through entities. Since small businesses create 70% of the new jobs and unemployment at 8.8% remains historically high, it doesn't make sense to raise taxes on small businesses. Supporters of the tax increases for those earning $250,000 a year would like to camouflage the tax hit on small businesses, but their attempts to mislead cannot withstand an honest examination. the marginal tax rate hikes would directly target flow-through businesses that employ 20 million American workers. It's a waste of resources for Washington to recycle tax dollars through the public sector when small businesses can do more good and get more bang for their own buck. And taxpayers in general deserve more bang for their buck. Madam President, I have a chart here that shows you an analysis by the Congressional Budget Office, the official nonpartisan scorekeeper for Congress. In its January 2011 Budget and Economic Outlook report, CBO reports that taxes has averaged 18% of the gross national product from 1971 to the year 2010. So this is a historical average, and what I think is very significant about an average going back to 1971 that taxes has averaged about that much is it seems to be a level of taxation that the people of this country have not revolted against, and it's a level of taxation that has not been harmful to the U.S. economy, as we have seen great growth during this period of time. So, here's where we are. Beyond the very negative impact of tax increases, there's no evidence that tax increases lead to deficit reduction. In fact, if history is any guide, Washington will simply spend the money. I often quote a Professor Vedder, V-E-D-D-E-R, of Ohio University, who has studied tax increases and spending for more than 2 decades. And this is the very same study I was referring to as I started my remarks today. Quote, over the entire post-World War II era through 2009, each dollar of new tax revenue was associated with $1.17 of new spending. So it's like a dog chasing its tail. It's never going to catch it. And if we raise a dollar and it doesn't go to the bottom line, and Professor Vedder says it doesn't go to the bottom line, it's a license to spend $1.17. Now, how do you ever get ahead? And then we got people that want to increase taxes because another dollar coming in is going to lead to $1.17 of spending. Well, it'd be one thing for me to vote for a tax increase if it went to the bottom line. It's another thing to vote for a tax increase that it just allows more spending and raises the deficit instead of getting the deficit down. People in my state of Iowa don't tell me that they're undertaxed. They know all too well that the problem is that Washington overspends. I have another, before this chart's taken down, just so you can understand here that, that there's no reason to raise taxes above this historical average to bring in more revenue, because you can see the projection out here by CBO that the existing tax rates are going to bring in more revenue without increasing tax rates just because of the economy growing. And we're going to get back to income coming from existing tax rates where they were at the time that we had the tax bill of 2001 and reduced taxes, the biggest tax increase in the history of our country, biggest tax decrease in the history of our country, we raised. And we brought more raised down and even got some additional revenue with reduced rates. But it's going to bring in just a heck of a lot more money. And that ought to be calculated. And you shouldn't do anything that's going to destroy this situation. I have there is this suggestion for eliminating the cap on wages, as some are proposing, would result in a huge tax increase of 6 2/10% on incomes of over $106,800. Both employees and employers pay these taxes. Those in favor of this will argue that it's needed to protect benefits for beneficiaries. Now, we've been down that road before. We've raised the tax rate in the 1980s. This was supposedly also to help benefits, but look where we are now. There's no guarantee that raising taxes in that way will guarantee benefits anymore. In this chart, once again referring to this chart, CBO, to be specific on this growth out here, CBO projects that taxes will average 19 9/10% of gross national product from 2010, and then they're going to rise to 20.8% of GDP by 2021. And if we increase taxes, I think it's going to put that economic growth in jeopardy. I request unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from Investors Business Daily. According to this article, if the government confiscated all of the income of people earning $250,000 a year, the money would fund the federal government today for a mere 140 days. Statistics tell us that the top 5% of the households earn 29% of the income and pay 43% of the income tax collected by the federal government.
Without objection.
I'll put the rest of my statement in the record. Does somebody else, if there's nobody else here,
You can continue. I was saying that you could add it to the record without objection.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you, Madam President. Thank you. We're in a situation where people are talking about increasing taxes on higher income people because supposedly they can afford it, and probably they can afford it. But what I get sick and tired about in this jargon that goes on here in Washington is the demagoguery of taxing higher income people when this group of people are already paying 43% of all the income tax coming into the federal government, and 47% of the people in this country don't pay any income tax whatsoever. How high do taxes have to go generally to satisfy the appetite of people in this Congress to spend money? And particularly, how high do they have to go on marginal tax rates to satisfy the people that the wealthiest in this country are paying enough money? I often quote, instead of this 5% figure, I think it's 1% of the wealthiest people, 27% of the income, pay 40% of the income tax. Now, if it be 41 or 42, maybe we look at it. But I never get the opinion from anybody that's proposing these higher marginal tax rates on upper income people that they're ever going to be satisfied that those people are paying enough taxes. So I get back to what I just said. You could confiscate, not just tax, but confiscate all the income that people make over $250,000 a year, and you're only going to run the government for 140 days. So what do you do about the rest of the year if you want the wealthy to pay all the taxes? We ought to have some principles of taxation that we're abiding by. And so I abide by the principle of 18% of the gross national product of this country coming to us to spend, leaving the 82% in the pockets of the taxpayers, because if 535 of us decide how to divide up the resources of this country, it doesn't do as much economic good if the money is left in the pockets of the 137 million taxpayers to decide whether to spend or to save it and how to save it. or what to spend it on. It responds to the dynamics of our economy, of the American free enterprise system, in a way that 535 members of Congress don't know enough how to do. And if we relied upon the 535 of us to decide how to spend more resources in this country, we wouldn't have the economic growth we have. We'd really be Europeanizing our economy, and we know that that's bad. So this principle of 18% is good, but also you got this principle of this amount coming in here pretty regularly. I mean, it's not a straight line here, but pretty even over a 50-year average. I think it averages out about 18.2%. Now, you've got the marginal tax rates going back to 93% in World War II and staying pretty much 93% until, as I said, Senator Kennedy becomes president. And then he decides that the marginal tax rate's too high for the good of the economy, and he reduces it. Now, I'm not sure exactly. I suppose because of Vietnam War, it went up a little bit here. And then it stayed pretty steady at 70 until there's a President Reagan. And then it goes down to 50 marginal tax rates. Then it stays there a while. Then in 1986, it goes down to 28%. And then we have the promise of no new taxes when President Bush reneged on that promise. They went back up to almost 40%. And then they went up again here and stayed here until we had the tax decrease of 2001. But you know what this shows here? Everybody's got an idea. You raise the marginal tax rates, you're going to bring in more revenue. But you know, the taxpayers of this country, the workers of this country, the investors of this country are smarter than we are. We think we're smart. We're going to raise marginal tax rates. We're going to bring in more revenue. But you have 93% marginal tax rates, 70% marginal tax rates, 50% marginal tax rates, 28% marginal tax rates, 35% marginal tax rates right now, but you get the same amount of revenue because people have decided that they're going to give us bums in Washington just so much of their money to spend, and it works out to be about 18%. So we got a president probably giving a speech today saying that you're going to raise taxes on higher income people because, like him, they ought to pay more money. Well, what do you get out of it? You can mess with these marginal tax rates all you want to, but you bring in about the same amount of revenue because people have decided that if we're going to tax them to death, they're going to take more leisure, they're going to invest in non-productive investments, and what you got to do is you got to keep marginal tax rates low so you expand this economy. As we have seen, when taxes go down, unemployment goes down. When taxes go up, unemployment, the incentive to employ is gone. And so here we are. I hope we have a president that is willing to look at history and learn from history. In his speech today, I yield the floor, Madam Chairman, Madam President, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.